Okay.
Okay, we'll start. We'll call the workshop to order. Welcome, everyone. We're very excited about this workshop on redistricting in 2022. I'm going to start the workshop by going around and introducing ourselves. I'll have the commissioners start by district. So, Commissioner Fetham.
This is Commissioner Fetham, District 1.
And I'm Commissioner Mary Jo McGuire, District 2.
Commissioner Trista Matis Castillo, District 3.
Commissioner Tony Carter, District 4.
Rafael Ortega, District 5.
Jim McDonough, District 6.
And we're anticipating Commissioner Reinhardt from District 7 to be joining us shortly. So she'll hopefully be on the meeting soon. So with that, I'm going to recognize Deputy County Manager Karen Francoise to introduce your team, and then I'll make a few open remarks, and then you can make a few open remarks. But
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Thank you for allowing us to be here today to talk with you about redistricting in 2022. Today, of course, I am Karen Francoise, and I am the Deputy County Manager for the Information and Public Records Service team. Today with me are our County Auditor Treasurer, Heather Bessler. We also have a guest with us today, the Senior Demographer from the Minnesota Demographic Center, Megan Dayton is here with us. And also we have our resident redistricting expert / elections manager, David Triplett. And he's going to share a lot of information with us about redistricting today. And you know what, I just have to say, I'm really glad to be here with the elections team today. They were talked about a lot at the board meeting this morning, and I just want to congratulate them on getting us through another election here in Ramsey County, and doing it with the excellence that they have come to be known for, and also for providing a really great space for our Right Track intern. County Manager O'Connor read the letter from their intern today, and it was just glowing. And I'm really proud of this team for the people that they are and the space that they make for others to really excel in that space as well. So now I am going to turn it over to Heather Bessler
actually, back to me. I want to make sure we recognize that County Manager O'Connor is also on the call.
Okay.
And Mi Chang as well.
Okay.
So just thank you for that, Deputy County Manager Francoise. And I'll just make a few opening remarks, and then we can turn it over to Auditor Treasurer Bessler. So thank you. I'm just add my congratulations and gratitude, as I know our whole board does, to your team, to the elections team, for helping the Right Track intern feel so welcome, and for all of your work in this last election cycle and for all of our election cycles. So thank you for all of your work. So with that, I'm just gonna make a few introductory remarks about this workshop on redistricting, because it's on many people's minds these days. And as we know, redistricting is done in the United States every 10 years after the completion of the census. And kudos again to Minnesota for our great census numbers, in which we kept our congressional seats and had a good accounting of our numbers of residents. In 2022, each level of government, the state legislature, cities, counties, and schools, will redraw the boundaries of their election districts to ensure that the people of each district are equally represented. As part of this redistricting process, the county board will reestablish or redistrict commissioner districts using the municipal precinct boundaries. Today's presentation and discussion will focus on the data needed to make these redistricting decisions and provide information on the general redistricting process. So I am really grateful for the team for putting this presentation together. And with that, I'll recognize, I think you want me to go to Auditor Treasurer Bessler for your remarks and your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, County Commissioners, County Manager O'Connor, and Deputy County Manager Francois for allowing us to present and discuss the upcoming redistricting process with you today. I'm Heather Bessler, the County Auditor Treasurer and Director of the Property Tax Records and Election Services Department. And I have the pleasure of introducing today's presenters to you. Our first presenter will be Megan Dayton, Senior Demographer at the State Demographic Center. Since 2012, Megan has been responsible for preparing demographic projections for the state of Minnesota, the 13 economic development regions, and the 87 Minnesota counties. Following Megan's presentation, Ramsey County Elections Manager David Triplett will provide information on the redistricting process. David has been serving the residents of Ramsey County over the last 19 years in various roles within the Ramsey County Elections Office. He started as an intern in the Elections Office in 2003, and in 2019 was appointed manager of the Elections Office. Megan and David's presentations seek to provide data and information on the current Ramsey County demographics and provide information on and discuss the redistricting process and the county's responsibilities throughout that process. Both Megan and David will be available for questions following their respective presentations. And so with that, I will turn the Zoom microphone over to Megan. Welcome, Megan, and thank you for joining us today.
All right, thank you. Madam Chair McGuire, thank you for having me here today, County Commissioners and Auditor Treasurer Bessler. I'm hoping that you can all see my screen and hear me, but if you can't see any of those or hear me, I'm sure you'll be waiting frantically, so I'll just roll with it here. Thank you so much for having me here today. I get to travel all around the state and talk about demographic trends, and part of that work after a decennial census is to talk about changes that we've seen during that time, which will impact redistricting, which is why we're here today. But I live in Ramsey County, and so this one is particularly special to me. So very happy to be here with the people who actually make decisions on where I live and how my kids grow up. So first of all, just thank you for all of the work that you do and for the service that you provide to the people of Ramsey County. I was just at Hennepin County a couple of weeks ago, explaining some of the same sorts of trends for our neighbors over in Hennepin County. And so this is very timely. So I'm going to talk about some general trends that we are seeing nationwide on a state level, and then we'll dig down into Ramsey County a bit too. If I can click into the right thing here. There we go. So I'm gonna take us back in time a little bit, and maybe this is information that you all know, but I think it's good foundation for the census and what it does. Back in 1950, Minnesota had 9 congressional seats. That was the last time that we had 9 congressional seats, because after the 1960 census, we lost our 9th congressional seat and we went down to 8, where we've been ever since. In the 2010 census, everyone was pretty sure that Minnesota was going to lose that 8th congressional seat. We ended up holding on to that 8th congressional seat in 2010 by about 7,000 or 8,000 people, which we thought was the slimmest margin possible. Fast forward 10 years, and we've learned a lot in that time. We kept our 8th congressional seat, as you know, but we held on to it by about 80 people. On a scale of 5.7 million people, that is a fraction that I'm not willing to calculate at the moment. It is so small. It still feels impossible. Once again, for the 2nd decade in a row, we received the very last seat in Congress. Minnesota did. So you can see there we're in one of the darker shades of green. Minnesota grew by about 7.6%, which is a pretty fast rate of growth compared to other Midwestern and Northeastern states. We are almost right on par with the national average at 7.4%, just a little bit faster. Between 2000 and 2010, Michigan was the only state in the country that lost population. Now we have 3 states in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a pretty rapidly declining population. We also have West Virginia at 3.2%, and then Mississippi and Illinois. But Illinois, that 0.1%, it's a pretty large population already in Illinois. So that was about 150,000 people that they lost in Illinois. So we feel pretty lucky here in Minnesota to hold on to those 7.6 percentage points that we grew. Like I said, there's the states in the Northeast parts of the country, the Midwest, have been losing population for quite some time to states in the South and the Western parts of the country. You still see South Dakota is growing a little bit faster than we are. North Dakota has the big oil boom over there, so they're cheating. But we have a pretty healthy growth rate at 7.6%. So here's what that looks like around the state. This is all of our 87 counties, and this is showing numeric population change. I realized once I clipped this and put it in there that Ramsey County is the total number is overshadowed there by the 130,000 in Hennepin County, but Ramsey County grew by about 44,000 people. It is well, we'll look at that in the next page, but you can see the blue, dark blue, light blue colored counties are the places where we're experiencing growth, and it tends to be centered around the Twin Cities metro. And then the growth follows the 94 corridor up through St. Cloud, Alexandria, over to the Fargo-Moorhead metropolitan statistical area. We see large pockets of growth also down toward Mankato, and then toward Olmsted County, which is Rochester, the Destination Medical Center, the Mayo Clinic and hospitals. There's also, just of note here, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but down here, that 912, that's Nobles County, and there's a large percentage of that population is foreign born. It is Mexican born, which leads to a younger population and still large amounts of growth. The Manila colored counties are experiencing decline, but it's relatively modest decline. The most decline that we saw in terms of numbers was Winona County at about 1,800 people. So Hennepin and Ramsey County together are adding almost 200,000 people. So that 1,000, 2,000 people, that's not very much. So the growth overwhelmingly outnumbers the declines. This is a similar sort of view, but this is percent change. We know that Hennepin and Ramsey County are the 2 largest counties based on population. So the number of people added in those 2 counties will dominate any other county in the state of Minnesota. But in terms of percent change, when we consider the 7-county metro that is absorbing most of the growth in Minnesota, Ramsey County has the lowest rate of growth of the counties in the Twin Cities metro. So on the last slide, you can see it's about 8% there for Ramsey County, and the other counties in the Twin Cities metro are above 10%. But again, same sort of trend. And that makes sense because these are the same numbers, but we see large pockets of growth going up through the 94 corridor and around to the bigger cities that I mentioned before. So here we're looking at the 2 counties compared with the state of Minnesota, and this is total population growth in the thousands over the course of the decade. Hennepin County is already larger than Ramsey County, and so the growth in terms of total population will be larger. But we saw almost no growth between 2000 and 2010 for Ramsey County. So the increase that we see here between this decade is much more optimistic than it was in the previous decade. So still strong growth here. So just based on cities, and I know St. Paul is not all of Ramsey County, but it's a large portion of it, and it's much of what we talk about when we're talking about Ramsey County. So the cities here, Minneapolis and St. Paul, make up about 20 to 25% of the state's overall population growth just in those 2 cities. And on a city level, not a county level, most of these cities are somewhere within the Twin Cities metro. So Minnesota is really unique in that we have most of our population growth has been and is continuing to be focused on the 7-county metro area. So this is what it looks like for population density. And it's not isolating Ramsey County. The census tools are not that powerful yet. But this is showing population density. So those dark blue colors that we have just east of 35E there in St. Paul. That is a census tract with 10,000 or more people in it. Right here, and then to the east side, right here, we're seeing large pockets of growth. There's some down in Hennepin, not Hennepin, Highland Park as well here, and then north of 94 in Frogtown, Midway, or the Summit University neighborhood, or just north of it. So this is population density, and this is isolating the 2020 census, so we can see where population density is really concentrated within Ramsey County and within St. Paul City proper. So when we look at, not all of the 2020 census data has been released, it's just the redistricting file that has been released so far. But what we can see is major race category and ethnicity, and we can see very broad age categories, so child 0 to 17, and then 18 plus, which doesn't really tell us a whole lot yet, but there is some really interesting stuff coming out of these data. So this is Minnesota overall. I'm going to start here, and then we'll dig into Hennepin and Ramsey County for this same table, but it's a lot of numbers, so I thought we could start big and then dig in smaller. So as not to overwhelm folks, but what we can see here over this decade, 2010 to 2020, the growth in Minnesota, the population growth, is fully attributable to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Over the course of this decade, you can see for the first time ever in Minnesota's history, the white non-Hispanic population has declined by about 51,000 people over the course of the decade. We are seeing just absolutely enormous growth in the multiracial category. We went from 103,000 to 236,000. We're not sure if that, because of the data that's been released yet, we're not sure if that is actual growth in the multiracial category or if it's a change in the way that people are self-identifying over the course of that decade. So we've got some more digging to do, but absolutely enormous growth there. The other race, non-Hispanic, there's huge growth there too, though it started as a very small number. The Black or African American and not Hispanic group is still the second largest cultural group in the state of Minnesota, just under 400,000 folks, but it's a change of about 123, 124 people over the course of the decade. The third largest group is the Hispanic or Latino of any race. That's just shy of the Black or African American broad racial category at 345 or 346,000 folks, and a change of about 100,000. So keep that in mind. We're going to go down to Hennepin and Ramsey County too. So here is what that looks like. You can see the difference. There's some major differences here between the statewide population and what we're seeing at the two largest counties in our state. First of all, for Hennepin County, there is still growth happening for the white non-Hispanic broad race group, though modest at about 14,000 people. Ramsey County is following the statewide trend with decline in the white non-Hispanic population of about 20,000 people. So while Hennepin County has a different story here, Ramsey County is right along with the state where the population growth in Ramsey County is fully attributable to BIPOC groups. So we're still seeing really large growth in the multiracial category. Let's see here. We've got too many apps open. Can't see what's going on here. This virtual world is throwing me for a loop, but Ramsey County has a little bit of a different story where the Black or African American is not the second largest cultural group in Ramsey County. It is the Asian Pacific Islander non-Hispanic group, but not far behind. They're about 15,000 people separate, and they both of those broad racial groups had very large amounts of growth in terms of the overall population change of 43,000 folks between that decade. So here's a different way to look at it, and I find this to be super interesting. Over here on the right, we have Minnesota. It's still about 76% white non-Hispanic. We see that the second largest chunk is Black, African American at 6.9%, and then Hispanic at 6.1%. But Ramsey County is so much more diverse than the state overall. That's not surprising to the people in this room. You all know that is the case for Ramsey County, and it's something that we're very proud of living here in Ramsey County. But looking at the pie compared to each other, I think just really drives that home. So Ramsey County is about 58% white non-Hispanic. We see that the Asian group is 15.6% of the total population, which is 3 times the size of the statewide share of the Asian population. Black or African American is 12.7%, which is twice what it is for the state. And then Hispanic population is 8.2%, which is 2 percentage points larger than the state overall. Our multiracial category is about the same, and we see similar shares for the other race category, and then relatively similar shares for American Indian, because we see the American Indian population in Minnesota is concentrated more in the northwestern portion of the state. But some really big differences here between the pie charts between Ramsey County and Minnesota in 2020. So the rest of our state has some catching up to do to be as awesome as Ramsey County, but that's just my opinion. Nobody asked me. All right. So here's some more look at what Ramsey County, what the Twin Cities, what St. Paul and Minneapolis to some extent look like on a census tract level for the Black or African American population. So this is the concentration by census tract of people who identify as Black or African American alone. 50 or more percent of the population within that census tract will lead to a dark green color. So for Hennepin County, we see that follows I-94. No surprise there. That is the Rondo community. It's historically been a very prosperous African-American middle-class community in the Rondo neighborhood. So no surprises there. There are a few other census tracts within Hennepin County that have 50 or more percent of the population is Black or African American. Down here, Highland Park area, over here where I am coming to you all from in the Battle Creek neighborhood, and some on the east side as well. This is the Asian concentration within Hennepin County. This is the breaks here have changed. It's not 50% or more. It is 20% or more for those dark green colors, but really heavily dominated over here on the east side of St. Paul proper. Large concentrations of folks who identify as Asian alone, again, by those census tracts, and up into the Maplewood boundaries here, but still within Ramsey County. So that's what I've got with you here today. I wanted to make sure that we have a ton of time for questions that are specific to the work that you all will do, but it's just a little bit of information as what's coming out from the Census Bureau with the redistricting data file, overall population, some really broad trends in race, ethnicity, and I'm hoping that soon we will get some more data so we can dig into age breakdowns. We know that there's been a huge amount of change in Ramsey County over the decades, so I'd love to dig into that more. But again, thank you for having me here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Demographer Dayton. We really appreciate this report, and we do have some questions here. So I'm going to call on Commissioner McDonough.
Maybe be counted on the, you know, where they grew up or where they live or where they go back to on the reservations, but they could spend a lot of their time here in the metro. And I'm just trying to connect the dots because I know a lot of the census will drive the money, right? And how the money follows the individual. And I'm just trying to get a sense of that especially with a highly mobile population like our Native American community moving from the metro, typically Hennepin and Ramsey, back to the reservations and back and forth? And how does the money maybe potentially get caught up to those individuals as they're looking for support and services in the community? And I have a different question after that.
Thank you.
Chair McGuire and Commissioner McDonough, that's a really good question and something that we struggled with, particularly with this decennial census compared to other decennial censuses that have been, that we have a very highly mobile population, and that's not unique to Minnesota or any one racial group. It's just a much more mobile population than we've ever had before, and it makes it really difficult to count people. Count them only one time and count them where they're supposed to be. We have, like you said, the Native American population in Minnesota will come to the Twin Cities, will go back to the reservation, and highly mobile populations like that. I think the short answer to your question is that the money and the services available to those folks don't get back to them because they are highly mobile. We have people in Minnesota for the summer that go down south or down, to some of the Western states for the winter months, and you can't split a vote, right? So you can't split the money that the census allocates for the political power. It's a huge problem lately. And so some of that change that we're seeing in the southern states, in the western states, the growth, that to some extent that's artificially inflated political power in those portions of the country, simply because you cannot split a person for their representation within Congress between two states or two boundaries in any way. We can't see more than over the course of really a decade at this point when people are actually moving. We have guesses in between the decennial census from the American Community Survey, but those are survey data and they have a pretty wide margin of error for a population of about 55 or 60,000 people, which is the Native American population in the state of Minnesota. So highly mobile populations like college students, the Native American population here in Minnesota, it's really hard to get the resources to those people that are available to them. I don't know that that was a direct answer to your question of how do the resources get to them, because I don't think that they do, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. And then my next question is really trying to get a sense here, and I know the census is really driven at the federal level, of course, but trying to catch up, right? I mean, we have this large group that we identify as Black, but within that community, yeah, it's really, you've got the descendants of slaves, that's, our traditional Black population in our community, but we have large East African and West African populations, Somali, that don't even really identify as Black. And a couple of those high density areas that you identified as Black are really Somali, Oromo, Eritrean communities. And I'm just wondering when maybe we catch up, or how do, because, within the community, the identification isn't the same, but really how we approach things, again, trying to provide services are unique to those differing communities. And especially here in Ramsey County, where we have large, one of the census tracts is in my district on the east side, it shows up as very dense and Black population, but I know it's almost all Somalis, which would not identify as Black.
Yeah, so Chair McGuire, Commissioner McDonough, it is, that's a huge problem. When I do a longer presentation, I go into census broad racial groups all the way back to like 1950, 1960 and how that changes. You can see in 1990 that the Hispanic population just appears out of nowhere. That's when the line begins. We know that those people don't just pop up out of nowhere, right? But it's the Census Bureau being about 20 years behind how people would choose to self-identify if they could. The Department of Justice actually defines those broad racial categories that are used by the Census Bureau. And there was some discussion at the federal level, again, leading up to the 2020 census on whether to include the MENA category, which is Middle Eastern North African. It was ultimately decided that the census would not include that category, and I think that that was a huge mistake. Again, nobody asked me, but I think that having particularly for places like Minnesota, where we do have a very large Somali population, Ethiopian population, the places that would identify as Middle Eastern, North African. I think it does a huge disservice to those people who would identify as that group because we're not able to identify them separately. We can do so with things like ancestry or subsequent questions that are asked on other surveys. But through the course of the 2020 census, those people are just lumped into this broad race category. Our office tried to break down those 17 largest cultural groups in the state a couple of years ago to try to, flesh out the nuances that exist within these 6 broad race categories that are increasingly, I wouldn't say meaningless, right? But they are less meaningful as the years go on. So again, I think the Census Bureau is about 20 years behind the way people would choose to self-identify. And for places like Minnesota, for places like Ramsey County specifically, it does a huge disservice to the population. But, we are at the mercy of the federal government. So that's the way we have to go.
Just a thought here on your comments, and I fully get that, but maybe we could help them maybe only be 10 years behind here, helping prepare and provide documentation and what's happening here so they understand why this is important, because it's not, nationally, it might be different groups, right? But helping prepare where you can maybe have that influence, because they'll start working on the 2030 census and how that gets shaped and formed here, not too far down the road here, and think about how we might be able to influence some of that based on what's happening in our communities. Thanks for the report.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner McDonough and Demographer Dayton. I have a question, and I think we could all dig even deeper into this data. It's very fascinating to me anyway. Thank you so much for it. But you said that in one of your early slides that the last the census that Ramsey County did not increase at all in their population, but that this year we had 7 point, or we did increase. So what do you attribute that the last census we didn't go up in population, but this one we did?
Chair McGuire, that's a really good question. Minnesota, the population growth in Minnesota is the wild card here is migration, particularly in Ramsey County. International migration, domestic migration was a big factor in the 90s, which led to large population growth in the metro area in Ramsey County in the 90s. Starting in 2001, we started to have negative domestic migration, meaning more people were leaving Ramsey County for other states than we had people coming into Ramsey County from other states. That went negative and was negative for about 17 years. It wasn't until 2017 that came positive again for the state of Minnesota. So I think that despite still modest amounts of growth in Ramsey County over that decade, the negative domestic migration and the tamped down international migration over those years led to very modest rates of growth in Ramsey County.
And do you have a theory on why there was negative migration? Or, is it just how people were moving in and out? I mean, we hear a lot that people want to be in Ramsey County because of their services. So this goes contrary to that, which I'm just curious if there's a theory that you have.
Yeah, Chair McGuire. Yeah, Chair McGuire. We, unfortunately, the census data that we have from the decennial census or from the American Community Survey doesn't tell us why people are moving, why they left, or why they came to a specific place. It's a shortcoming that is incredibly frustrating with the data that we have to use. So anything that I could report there would be relatively anecdotal or academic research based, which is not specific to Ramsey County. So unfortunately, we just don't know.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Commissioner Carter has her hand raised.
Thank you very, very much. Again, this is intriguing information. And of course, it's every 10 years. So we likely have a number of questions that we won't get asked today, and certainly would look forward to connecting back with you as you find the discoveries that you'll dig deeper for and to get additional update over the next few years. I wanted to ask about the Native American Indian population numbers. It seemed to me that I glanced and saw that although our percentage went up from 0.5 to 1%, we had lost population. Is that true?
That is true, but it's, excuse me, Chair McGuire, Commissioner Carter, thank you for your question. That is true, that is the case. We're still at about 0.5% of the total population in Ramsey County identifies as Native American, American Indian, Alaska Native is the actual category there. But the size of the population decreased by 150, about 200 people. But it is still a decrease over the course of those 10 years.
Okay, there's something counterintuitive about that for me, and I don't know what it is about my head. The population increased in terms of percentage to 1% is what I thought I saw, from 0.5 to 1%. Was that true?
Chair McGuire, Commissioner Carter, that was comparing the state of Minnesota to Ramsey County specifically. So overall in the state of Minnesota, we have 1% of the population identifies that way, but it's 0.5% in Ramsey County.
Now, thank you for turning my head back on right. I appreciate that. And then it would be interesting to explore, and you mentioned you have to dig deeper. Is there a process that you will be going through to look at that, what is in multiracial, what is in others, so that we can better understand, as Commissioner McDonough well put it, based on how people identify themselves, where they naturally gravitate? And is there a process that federal census goes through in debriefing these numbers along with states to ensure that they do hear from us? It's not, us scratching to make sure that we're able to get there, but are they typically going to do something to scrub through and understand where people are identifying? And if so, we'd be very interested in knowing how. We also connect a community discussion to that, because yes, we are years behind, and it's important to know that as we try to catch up, populations are moving in terms of how they identify themselves. So if we can catch up by being on the ground with our community in that process, it would be helpful. Is there something to which we can connect as you explore and as federal government does as well?
Chair McGuire and Commissioner Carter, amazing question that I think we are getting better at, but we have not fully caught up to. And we saw that happen with the 2020 census as we were preparing for it. On a state level, we're charged with the community organizing and getting people out there to explain what the census is, what it's not, and get people to fill out their form. But we're going into the community relatively uninformed because the Census Bureau is 20 years behind those trends. We do have things like the State Data Center Network, which our office is part of. We are the Minnesota representatives for the State Data Center Network. And so the Census Bureau does a good job of creating a feedback loop there. There's an opportunity for us to engage with the Census Bureau in the State Data Center Network. We also have the federal and state cooperative for population estimates and projections, which our office is also the representative for that as well. So I think there are some opportunities set up for the feedback loops I think that you're talking about, but it's not working, in my opinion, as well as it could or should to get us caught up to those trends that you're talking about. We have a highly mobile population. We have, for the first time ever, we used online census forms. I think here in 2021, I find that to be unacceptable. I think that's, we're just not utilizing the tools that are available to us to capture the 350 million people that live in this country. And then we had a pandemic on top of that. So our office is doing something a little bit different than the federal government. We're an office of about 4 people, 4 full-time staff. We have 3 demographers and an admin assistant, but we tripled our staff for the census, the decennial census. And so some of those people are still working on a follow-up report of what we did, what worked, what didn't work. So hopefully we can start from there for the 2030 census and whatever that ends up looking like. But I think we need maybe a year to breathe, and then we get back to thinking about the decennial census again. But 10 years, I think, is there's a lot of things that can be done. I have ideas about 10 years is too long to go between a national count or any large number of people. Sharing data across agencies at the federal level or the state level is next to impossible, but it doesn't seem like it should be. So definitely some improvements to be made there. And I think it goes beyond the Census Bureau, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Justice, to figure out how these agencies can talk to each other, how county commissioners like you all can have an impact on how data are collected and how we can use them. I hope that helps.
Thank you. It does.
And these, oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Carter, were you finished?
I was just going to say, and it's helpful to have an articulation in that process after the census, of how the census actually impacts us. On the back end, we talk about it so much on the front end, but for people to see and understand and hear the stories of how communities show up in that data would be helpful. So I look forward to, I know we all look forward to that additional work that you intend to do in that process and making sure we're connected into it and with our communities. Thank you.
So it of course occurs to all of us that we could spend a lot of time on these questions from the state demographer and how we count our people and things. We do have 2 more hands up, but we do have a 15-minute presentation by Manager Triplett, and then we want to have enough time for our redistricting questions. So I see County Manager O'Connor and then Commissioner Reinhardt for just some brief comments, because we want to for sure get to the presentation by Manager Triplett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And you're reading my mind a little bit. We have on November 23rd scheduled a committee of the whole with a strategic team to dive deeper into census data. That would involve Met Council being a part of that as well. And it'll be an opportunity for us to continue. So as questions come up, to the extent you can think about how we're only going to focus on that topic on that day. And I just wanted to make that connection that we're going to have another bite at some of this important dialogue going forward.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, County Manager. And now Commissioner Reinhardt, if, yeah, you can call on you. Oh, and you're on mute, or we can't hear you for some reason, Commissioner Reinhardt.
Okay, sorry about that. I just wanted to note that, the partnership that we had between St. Paul and Ramsey County and the efforts that we did, obviously, I mean, it was absolutely amazing. And this is the 3rd redistricting that, or census that I have been participating in. And I know that one of the biggest issues was really the security of the data. Because the Census Bureau, Federal Census Bureau really takes that very, very seriously. And so I can see the pros and cons of how do we make sure that we get an accurate count, but that data, because everybody counts, means that, there are people that had concerns about it. I also think that it's worth noting that during this census cycle, we had a lot of things in place. And the 2016 election really kind of upended some of that. I mean, staffing, some of the questions, the court battles, everything that went on. And so I really want to give credit to our staff, to this, all across Ramsey County, the number of people that were involved in this. I want to give credit to them, because this wasn't, not that any census is the same as the last one, but this one had some special challenges that came into play that everybody had to kind of work through. And I can't say thank you enough for all that took place. But sometimes we forget about those extenuating circumstances that really put our residents in fear in many cases. So I just wanted to note that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Reinhardt. And now I'm going to call on, I think, should I just call directly on Manager Triplett to give your report? And we're going to try and do this. If you could hold your questions until he's finished with this presentation, I think then we'd get through that, and then we'll have questions after. Thank you, Manager Triplett.
Great, Chair McGuire, thank you. Members of the board, thank you for having me here to go over redistricting. I know for some of you, this might be redundant because you've been through redistricting before, but you're all candidates at one point or another. So I'm also sure you're aware of redistricting because it does impact candidates. But neither here nor there, this just gives us a good opportunity to get on the same page, kind of review the responsibilities because redistricting is happening at all levels of government. So we're using that opportunity today to achieve those purposes. So what is redistricting? I think we've talked about it in a few points here already, but it's the redrawing or reestablishing of election districts to make sure that all voters or residents are equally represented. It generally happens every 10 years. Most state laws is when that's required. So that will again happen before this year's state primary in August. There are some district changes that can occur in between redistricting. A lot of those are precinct changes that you'll see occasionally to kind of clean up territory. But generally, most redistricting will happen right after the census. And then who is responsible? All levels of government except for the federal government are required to redistrict. So it will start with the Minnesota legislature, creating the legislative boundaries and congressional districts, and end up with the counties doing the final work. So let's talk about some of these responsibilities. So first, the Minnesota legislature will draw the state's congressional districts and the legislative districts. That's their responsibilities. After that work's completed, the cities and townships will then draw their ward and precinct boundaries. And then finally, using these boundaries, the counties will come in and create the county commissioner districts using the precinct boundaries established by the cities. And the school districts will also do the same thing. Specifically, the responsibilities of the county on the next slide. And for those of you members who are, one slide back, thank you. For those of you counting along at home, we have 14 slides, so we are at 70. So what are the duties of the county? It's really broken into two parts, the auditor duties and then the duties of the board. The auditor duties are very administrative. We have to provide all the state legislative plans to our cities. And so once those are adopted by the legislature, we'll pass those on to our cities and townships. Then we will update the statewide voter registration system with all the new plans from the cities and the commissioner districts. And we'll also ensure that the voters are in their correct precincts. And once that work's done, we will then send notice to the voters through a mailing, social media, and other avenues that are available to notify them of these changes. Because given that this happens every 10 years, most voters will be impacted in some way or another on redistricting. So we will communicate this to all the voters well ahead of time. And then the other duty of the county or responsibility of the county is the board's duties, and that is to actually reestablish or redistrict the commissioner districts using the municipal precincts. So because our role is really limited and the county is the last political subdivision to redistrict, we have a really limited role. So if you all have ideas about kind of legislative districts or precinct boundaries, this is a good time to work with those bodies and kind of lobby them for changes that you're hearing about or that are of interest to you. Because since we are last in this process, we're kind of, our hands are really tied to what the cities and the legislature do. So this is a good time to be aware that if there's changes that are beyond the county's role, that lobbying should begin now. Another implication is that these new boundaries will be used for the next decade. So the changes that you all will make in early 2022 will have impacts for the next 10 years. So a lot of foresight is also required during this process. And then also being mindful of the 5% rule for county commissioners. If your districts change by 5%, a special election will be required. I will point to the Minnesota statute 375.025 subdivision 4 for this. It also discusses about what happens if redistricting places you outside of your district if you no longer live there. So those are things to be aware about as we go through this redistricting process. Some principles to be aware about, to be aware of as we go through redistricting. The 1965 Voting Rights Act actually talks a lot about redistricting and how plans cannot discriminate based on race, membership in a minority group, and other factors. And so that Voting Rights Act is real important as we consider the new plans. Districts also must be equally populated as best as possible. And that is to ensure that one vote, one person, one vote, and to make sure that all residents are equally represented. Districts should be compact, contiguous, and preserve communities of interest. I'm sure you're all very familiar with some of the old gerrymandered examples of the past, or even of the present in other states. And then communities of interest is an interesting term. It could be, I think the term itself is a group that has a common interest or a common passion. It can be a community interest, could be the state of Minnesota. We're all represented by one governor in the boundaries. It can be as minor as, you know, a few people who live on a block that have a very special interest about some policy. So as the board and as you go through this redistricting process, it's really up to you all to understand what are our communities of interest in Ramsey County and to ensure that those plans represent the communities of interest that you are aware of throughout the county here. And as our state demographer office presented, we have one of the most diverse counties in the state. And so being aware of those communities of interest will be really important as we complete this work. And then finally, we want to avoid districts that favor or disfavor an incumbent, a candidate, or a political party. I'm sure you're all aware of where your votes are coming from on any given election. So making sure that we create politically competitive districts and ones that don't provide any favor to a candidate is also really important to this process. What's the timeline? This is really important. Redistricting is a lot of hurry up and wait. And then when the work starts, we're going to move really quickly. And so this timeline is really important. We say tentative because, as you all know, or maybe you're not aware of, the state legislature generally doesn't hit their timeline, and the courts have to intercede and create plans. And so that could throw this timeline off. But there's a tentative deadline for the legislature to complete their work by February 15th. State law says it must be done 25 weeks before the primary. So the legislative and congressional boundaries should be done mid-February. This will kick off that really busy time because our cities and townships only have 60 days to complete their plans once the legislature passes their boundaries. And that's going to be about by the end of March. And then once they're done, the county has 80 days to finish our work to create our commissioner districts, excuse me. Where the time really gets crunched here is if our cities take the entire 60 days, we only have 20 days to complete our work. So this timeline really does speed up once it kicks off. And then as a reminder to everybody, we've already informed our cities of this, but no special elections can be held in April and May of 2022. So February is the only date available for special elections. And our office would have to be notified by November 26th in order to make that date. So just important for this body, if you intend on having any special elections, February is the only date that can be done outside of our August and November elections next year. We are also working to onboard a consultant to help with this process. Their role will be to act as a non-biased agent to help manage the entire redistricting process. One of their duties will be to engage board members and solicit your feedback and hear what your concerns are and what you're looking for in new districts. They'll also conduct public input processes. That could be a town hall. There could be many various other ways to incorporate the public in this process. We also would like them to draft potential redistricting plans for you all to consider. And then they will also ensure that this process is completed in a timely manner because of that quick timeline that we will have to follow once the legislature acts. We've also set up an internal redistricting team staffed by county employees. This is a cross-department team from the elections office, communications, policy and planning, the GIS team, as well as a few others I've probably missed. But the role of this team is to provide technical support to the board, to your staff, to the redistricting consultant, to the county auditor. We're here as an informational resource to assist the work of redistricting and also to assist a consultant. And then finally, we'll verify that the final commissioner plans are meeting all the statutory requirements as we go forward through this process. And that team has been meeting, maybe since this summer. And I think the first action you'll all find out, you're getting your ESRI licenses so you and your staff can begin manipulating those district plans.
Hey, Dave, if I can just jump in real quick for you. Thanks for what's sharing. Just to put a finer point on it, for many commissioners, you've been through the redistricting process here a time or multiple times before. in many cases, what you're hopefully seeing is this is a pretty consistent approach the county has employed in the past. The biggest difference is, as you've been through budget conversations, so I'll tie it back to budget dialogues this past year, as the resource strain hits our staff and where we sit, the ask to bring in that consultant to help buttress this internal team that's here to administratively design and deliver on the work here in partnership with the board. That's really the biggest difference. Is we had some resource to do it. And as we say to our teams, like, tell us where we need to make sure we have the, the support to get these things done in a timely manner and keep moving. That would probably be the biggest difference from the past. And I appreciate the work of everyone to help identify that so we can line it all up.
Thanks, Ryan. And what's happened so far? So there have been some legislative, judicial, and state actions already for the 2022 redistricting. The Minnesota House and Senate have both had their redistricting committees hold hearings. I think some of you have either been aware, asked to attend, but these have happened, and I believe most of them have come to a completion as of now. Most of these were in the late summer. There was a court case that prompted the Minnesota Supreme Court to appoint a redistricting panel, and that's assuming that the legislature does not complete their work. This panel then can step in and create the plans. They held, I think it was 14, maybe it was 12, but they held a handful of public hearings a few weeks ago, and they hit them every night across the state of Minnesota, and those allowed the public to give them feedback. So if they have to create plans, they're ready to go, and they have information from the public to draw these legislative plans. And then finally, the Minnesota Office of the Secretary of State is holding trainings for the county auditor offices around the state. State law requires the Secretary of State to train the auditors on our duties for carrying out redistricting. And those trainings started occurring in the fall. And then once a month on Fridays, they have kind of an open session where auditors can go ask questions and get the most up-to-date information. So there have been some activities here more recently beginning to pick up as we get closer to winter, when this work will begin. And then finally, these are just some available resources. We do have a redistricting website set up on our county's webpage for external use for our residents to get information about redistricting. The Minnesota Office of the Secretary of State also has an information and data portal where most of the redistricting data lies. It's a pretty good resource that has most of the data you're looking for that you'll need through the redistricting process. And then the Minnesota Judicial Branch also set up a web page for this redistricting panel they set up that has a lot of good past documents from the 2000 and 2010 redistricting, as well as documents going forward if they in fact have to redistrict this year. So that completes my presentation for the members of the board. So we'll take any questions or any additional information Heather or Ryan would like to share.
Thank you, Manager Triplett. I don't know if there's any further comments that Director Bessler wants to make, or County Manager O'Connor. Otherwise, I'll take questions from the board. Are there any other comments you'd like to make?
Two things, Madam Chair, just on the timelines, because like David said, there's a lot moving all at once, and it's always trying to keep it all tracked, and there's a lot of prep that goes into the process. On the side of public input, because of what we saw earlier on the demographic pieces around our community and new residents and continued growth, it is an opportunity to make sure people understand how this work gets done every 10 years. And so some sort of informational town hall is likely going to be something that we want to do to make sure that people understand how this all works. It ties to feeling engaged. It ties into the idea of voter turnout. We've seen some of that in the past and want to continue to do that on that side of like, this is how your government functions. And this is a once every 10-year piece to how that all works. And much of the baseline information that you saw today is the underpinning of that type of presentation. So more to come when that happens. The other two pieces, Dave mentioned the ESRI licenses, so we can talk more about that if you want, but they are moving toward your offices as we speak, and that's getting finalized soon, which allows you the ability to be able to look at some of what we're talking about today in a software platform that allows it to work. And then finally, on the part I'll bring the consultant on board, I will say that I know the deputy county manager with the team here has been interviewing applicants who came in. Our process to get someone in, so they're sitting with our team from the outset, and so that they can begin to engage with your offices as a part of this process. And so that's in the works. I don't have a specific timeline, but we'll provide additional updates as we go.
Thank you. Thank you, County Manager O'Connor. I have a couple of questions. I'm also looking for questions from my colleagues. But just to clarify, when you said that the school district and county lines will be drawn, will the actual boundaries, or will districts within those boundaries, like will the Ramsey County actual, boundaries be changed? I think county boundaries all stay the same. It's just districts within the counties, and same for school districts. Will school districts have the right to? They don't have a right to change their boundaries, just districts within the boundaries, right? Can you just clarify that?
Chair McGuire, yeah, the districts within those districts will change, but the school district boundary and obviously the Ramsey County boundary will not change.
Right. Okay, thank you. I thought that was the case, and so I wanted to clarify that. And then also, just as chair of the legislative committee, I don't know if you have any suggestions now, but if there's any legislation that you think we might want to pass on to the legislature and work for there, we would obviously welcome that. And I don't know if you have anything that you'd want to talk about now, but we can definitely be open to that, because you're right. If the legislature is going to be making some of those decisions, we'd like to influence them if we feel it would be helpful. So, but with that, I'll call on Commissioner McDonough.
Thanks, Chair McGuire. I guess my question's starting to get more specific here, and my memory may be failing me a little bit, but it seems to me this kickoff on redistricting, typically we have the numbers now. We would see our maps of where the population has grown in which districts, what districts of, where we're going to start seeing the potential for shifts, so the public can see that, start being aware of that. And I haven't seen that. Are we going to get that today here?
Commissioner or Chair McGuire, Commissioner McDonough, no, we do not have that specific data today, but we certainly can provide it to the group very shortly here. And that's something the internal team that we've created is definitely set up to provide.
I mean, we know the population of the county. We know where our districts are. So we should know what the current population of our districts are. So we start getting the sense of, and we know what the target is going to be for 7 divided by 549,000 or whatever. So we start, not only us, but the public. And I'd say that, especially because in my district where I've already announced I'm not running, and people are thinking about, the potential for being a candidate or whatever, they're going to really be paying attention, especially if they live around the peripheries here of, putting a lot of energy into potential campaign, but then all of a sudden not being a part of a district that they thought that they might be interested in. So the sooner we get that out about what the target's going to be for our 7 districts as far as trying to get to an equal number, but also what the current population is of our current district, so people have an understanding of where shifts might be occurring, I think it's going to be really helpful.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioner McDonough's question, I would ask that the team, based on the data we have, that's something we can get done soon, and we can put onto that redistricting page that was referenced earlier here as a part of this presentation. And we will work on that to get that back out sooner rather than later for the reasons you just cited.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner McDonough. I agree. That would be really helpful information. So thank you for that. And thank you, County Manager O'Connor. Okay, Commissioner Reinhardt.
And I think that information is really important as well, but I think just as important, maybe more so even, is to get that consultant on board, because they have the time in between. I mean, those numbers are just pretty straightforward numbers. But I think that we need to have, because we want to make sure that for our sake and for other candidates' sake, that we have the professionals in line or under contract, and so that they can move forward with it, because trying to, I don't know what to, I just want to make sure that we do it so that it's something that is reliable and that we have the consultant in place. Otherwise, people can play games with some of these numbers and manipulate and do all kinds of things with them. And I think, and I'm talking about us too, so that we don't end up doing that. But the professional consultant, I think, is going to be critical in all of this, just as it has been, probably more so even than in the past. Because, I mean, we're a fully developed county, so there's not massive changes like there are in some other counties, but there are still changes. And so I know that you said, Ryan, that we would have somebody in place, and I'm just encouraging that we do that sooner rather than later as well. And the timeline's pretty tight here right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Reinhardt. Are there any other questions that the board has before I turn it back to our presenters to see if they have any closing remarks? We do look forward to that, to the information that is about to come on the districts. And as I said, if there's any legislative work that you think we should work on, we'd love to see that. But with that, then I will ask either Manager Triplett or Auditor Treasurer Bessler if you have anything else you'd like to say, or Demographer Dayton, if there's any final remarks that any of you would like to make. And then I'll turn it over to Deputy County Manager Francois to close us out. Anything?
Thank you, Chair McGuire, commissioners, for allowing us to talk with you today. And thank you very much to Megan Dayton for presenting today that great information. And I will turn it over to Karen.
Thank you, Heather and David and Megan, for putting this together for us today. The information is obviously greatly important to all of us in Ramsey County. And I definitely heard what you were saying, Commissioner Reinhardt. We will be engaging a consultant very soon here. And Commissioner McDonough, we will be providing the information that you've asked for. One of your colleagues already has that information all pulled together. Thank you, Trista. But just thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity to be here today. And please feel free to reach out to Dave or Heather or myself, our County Manager O'Connor with any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you all for a great workshop. We appreciate it. More work to come, but just keep up your good work. And with that, yes.
One last thing, I just wanted to ask Megan if she would tell Susan Brower that Karen Francois said hello. I appreciate her a lot, and I haven't seen her in a while, so please let her know.
I think maybe we'd all like to say hello to Susan Brower. So, you can give her greetings from the Ramsey County Board.
I absolutely will.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, thank you all, and have a great afternoon. We'll be back together at 1:30 for another workshop led by Commissioner Mattis Castillo. So with that, this workshop is over. Thanks. Have a great
Thank you.